Welcome to this session where we will be looking at ancient Greek and Roman architecture. The contents will be broken up into three parts. First is an overview of architecture in Greek and Egyptian prehistory between 3000 to 700 BC. Second part, it will be architecture in classical Greece between 700 BC to 600 AD. And third part, we'll be looking at architecture in classical Rome, which is between 800 BC to 393 AD. If we trace the ancient Greek and Roman civilization, we will focus on the Mediterranean Sea area. The Greek civilization was dispersed, diverse, and varied, not the unified civilization you would expect from the history books. In fact, Greek culture is probably a more accurate term to use than Greek civilization, because Greek culture would explain the use of a Greek language and common ideas about the world over a wide geographical area. So in the diagram you see Singapore is being labeled as well. What will be interesting to consider is the similarities in context between these two different regions, because Singapore is an island within an archipelago as well. So what are the similarities and what are the differences in terms of the culture, in terms of the language, in terms of ideas about the world? That is interesting to consider. So ancient Greece, it was a network of independent city-states, and they are linked via a common culture, right? Linked via the use of the Greek language, the Greek belief system, and Greek ideas, right? And the city-states are often independently governed, right? And is not subject to a central power or a central order. Okay, so if you look at the map, it consists of these land areas that's surrounding the sea, right? In North Africa, in Southern Europe, the Levantine, and around the Black Sea, right? Which is Eastern Europe and Russia. So culturally, these areas are all very heavily influenced by the Greek language and ideas. In terms of time frame, the period before 3100 BC is referred to as prehistoric Egypt. And between 3100 BC to 323 BC, this is a period referred to as dynastic Egypt. It includes various kingdoms and intermediate periods, which we will not go into detail here. So this time ends with Ptolemaic Greek Egypt in 323 BC. So this was a time where there was trading between North Africa and Southern Europe, if you refer to the previous map. And there were cross-cultural flows of ideas alongside the trade. Both cultures gained a lot from this exchange in terms of ideas, shared religious ceremonies, religious concepts, crafts, architectural ideas, and philosophy, right, due to this contact. So we must not think about the ancient world as a backward, disconnected, primitive sort of civilizations. On the other hand, people were actually engaged in multinational trade of very high value items, and they shared intellectual and religious discourse very actively, and they lived and worked amongst each other in a very harmonious kind of cooperation. So you notice that the period of dynastic Egypt takes place over thousands of years, right? Meaning there is political continuity. So what it means is that there is also continuity of religious, artistic, architectural ideas, right? So architecture is used in dynastic Egypt to ensure the stability of the cosmological order, right? So once the things on the political front, there is a certain stability, then the civilization can consider what is beyond. Pyramids are used as ritual vehicles to ensure the king's safe passage to the afterlife. And tomb objects and images were meant to be hidden and only seen by the gods or in the afterlife. And pyramids were built for a short time in Egypt's history, whereas temples have a much longer history if you trace back. Right, that is why in the images of pyramids that we are familiar with, you will notice that they are quite bare, except for the expression of the construction materials. But when they explore the inside, it tends to be filled with objects, images, and artwork, right, due to this reason. When we think about Egypt, one of the first images that come to mind will be that of the pyramid. But if we were to look at the entire history of Egypt, we will realize that the time period occupied by the pyramids is actually very short in relation to that of the temples. And the function of the pyramids are primarily as vehicles to ensure the smooth journey of the kings into the afterlife. Whereas temples, they are associated with the creation of the world itself. And architecture is used both in a symbolic way and as well as to create an atmosphere to recall the marshy state of the world at creation. The temple mirrored the mode of creation emerging from primeval waters, and the vertical emphasis of the gateways and changing floor levels remembers the emergence from the waters. And the temple roof, it represented and it was decorated with the sky, and the columns were shaped as plants like lotus, palms, and papyrus. And if you look at the photograph on the right, notice the difference in scale between the columns and the human beings. You can almost imagine what it was like to visit such a temple. The awe of the architecture, and it reminds the human how small and transient his existence is. The period from 323 BC to 30 BC, this is the period known as Ptolemaic Egypt. It began with Alexander the Great's conquest and ends as a Roman province. So there were around 3 centuries of Greco-Roman's presence and exchange in Egypt. So this exchange resulted in very rich and hybrid artistic and architectural forms. Architectural speaking, there are peristyle, which is a row of columns surrounding a space within a building, such as a court or internal garden, or edging a veranda or porch space. There is hypostyle of a building, having a roof supported by columns, typically in several rows. There is also the pronaos, which is a visible space at the front of a classical temple, enclosed by a portico and projecting side walls. And the example shown here is the Temple of Horus, which is the raven god. It is a hybrid Greco-Egyptian building using elements from both cultures together. Consider the role of nature and the natural world for early civilizations such as ancient Greece. Without modern tools and systems of knowledge, people explain things in the most logical ways. Nature was understood as powerful because it was powerful, and as such was treated with reverence and respect. In earthquake-prone Greece, the land could suddenly rise up and destroy cities. There is nothing a human could do against an earthquake or tidal wave except for to wait for it to be over, and then try to explain what had just happened. The first way that the ancient Greek explained nature was full of reverence, wonder, and a sense of imminent danger all around them. It was tolma, an overwhelming wonder. And the human life was up to Moira, to fate. And what can they do about it? The language to speak about this feeling of overwhelming wonder and reverence and fear was firstly myth. Mythology was used to explain these overwhelming feelings in a simple, logical way. Myth explains human existence, natural disasters, why things are the way they are. So we must not think of people in the past as less knowledgeable or less intelligent, or of us having better knowledge or tools. It is a simply different context. Earlier humans were smart, logical, and thought through the implications of life and the world around them. They just used a different language to do so. Mythology. From mythology comes the first architecture, and architecture grows out of the logic of myth. Mythological understanding of the world could not be understood by just anyone. Most people didn't know how and could not communicate with the Fusis. This was the domain of the initiated. So those with special knowledge, such as the priests and the oracles, it was the task of those with this knowledge to tell others and to explain what was happening. Early Greek architecture didn't look particularly Greek because what we imagine as ancient Greek architecture took time to develop. The period we associate mentally with ancient Greek architecture is really about 400 BC. Before that, people built in different forms using different materials, but a few things were consistent. The need to mitigate disasters and the need to communicate with the Fusis or to the gods. The need to make a proper place to respect these forces of the cosmoi so that they can be given the honor and offerings that they deserve. And the need to ensure a safe distance for those not initiated, while ensuring that the priests and oracles have good access to the correct sites with the most power to ensure clear communication. Before temples were invented, caves, groves of trees, mountains, these were important places of worship. There is a clear connection between the site and worship, and certain sites were deemed more powerful or offered more direct communication with Fusis or the gods than others. So these special sites, they were set aside for worship. In some early ritual practices, such as processions, the sacrificing of animals, or offering of produce such as olive oil or textiles, or the ritual adornment of statues, these carried on into the classical era. So, for example, the hepatoscopia involves allowing an animal, usually a goat or a sheep, to graze around a key site, or rather on the key site, where they wish to build a temple or a house or a very important building. They allow the graze for a certain amount of time, maybe a month, and then the animal is sacrificed and its liver is examined as a sort of spiritual topographical map of the site and its health. So a healthy liver would indicate that it is a good site and the essence of the god to the proposed program. So the architectural implication to this kind of rituals is that the development of the naos or the cella. A cella, which from Latin it means small chamber, or naos, in Greek it means temple. It is the inner chamber of a temple in classical architecture, or a shop facing the street in domestic Roman architecture, such as a domus. There is also the ante, which is a special name given to a type of ancient Greek or Roman temple which has side walls that extend to form a porch at the front or rear, or both, and terminated in structural pillars that were called the ante. The site is important as a bridge between the heavens and the earth. The gods must be happy. Please the gods with the site and orientation. Tracing the etymology, which means the origin and the meaning of the word architecture, architecture is what happens before the building takes place. It is the essential thing that must happen before anything can happen, and it is also the way in which things appear. Architecture in this sense involves both a knowing of how things are made and the performance of the making. The architect in ancient Greece is skilled in both practical knowledge and the theoretical knowledge. This combination of making and letting appear is compared in many ancient societies to the work of the creator God. This idea that God or the gods were architecting is common across many cultures in many forms. In ancient Greece and other traditional cultures, the work of the architect created a type of order which allowed the gods and humankind to dwell together. It allowed the gods and humankind to interact and to maintain a good relationship. This ordering by making architecture ensured a stable relationship between the gods and humankind. Cosmology presents the order of all known things in the cosmos. Cosmology is order and knowledge. Understanding that the cosmos itself is ordered and regular and hierarchical have huge implications for architecture. The place of everything in the universe, including the planets, the stars, the sun, the moon, nature, humans, animals, plants. The fact that the cosmos obeys and is ordered by a numerical and geometrical system that is regular and non-random, it is important. And the world itself has order, and this order is mathematical. All these have huge implications for architecture. Around the 6th century, the first Greek cities emerged, and trade, commerce became more important. As a result, the civic society of the polis develops, because trade needed accounting, currency, mathematics, and laws, and trade needed reason instead of mythology. Reason is associated with philosophy, is associated with mathematics. And mathematics govern physis and cosmoion. The gods use mathematics, that was the belief. And mathematics is numbers and geometry, and this is believed to be the order of all things. Mathematics is key to the new world that emerges in around 600 BC, the world that is governed by order, hierarchy, proportion, measurements, and number. Philosophy engages with this order and explains how this system works. At this time, philosophy includes what we would call science, religion, astronomy, mathematics, geometry, law, biology, etc. In the diagram on the right, you see the famous optical tricks of Greek architecture in use. Notice the gradual swelling of the column from the top to the bottom with its central point to avoid a seemingly warped waist. Technically, we call it the antithesis, and a similar gentle rise in floor level to the center of the supporting platform so that the rows of column does not appear to sag. A typical Greek city was built around a fortified hill called an acropolis. Here was located the city's chief temple, treasury, and some other public buildings. At the center of the city was the agora, the central space where public meetings were held and where traders set up their stalls. The agora was often flanked by colonnades, and as the city outgrew its local water supply, water was brought in from neighboring hills by means of channels cut in the rocks and clay pipes. These fed fountains from which the poorer people could collect water, as well as private wells situated in the larger houses. The city was surrounded by high and wide walls. In later times, these were made of stone, brick, and rubble. Towers were built at regular intervals, and fortified gateways pierced the walls to allow roads to pass through. Outside these walls was another public space called the gymnasium, and gymnasium often had public baths attached to them. And also outside the walls would be the theatre, built into a hillside and semi-circular in shape. The audience would sit at the tiered seats looking down onto a space called the orchestra, where the performances would take place. Surrounding the city was the farmland of the city-state. Many of the citizens lived within the city walls and walked out to their fields each day to work. Greek architecture is known for its grace and simplicity, and the finest buildings were their temples, parts of a Greek temple demonstrates the architectural order that is attuned to the order of the gods. The ordering is precise, mathematical, and geometrical, reflecting the hierarchical, ordered cosmos. So, what is the role of the architect in all this? He is to follow the order set out by the gods for everything else. He follows the order, proportion, and measurement found underlying all things in the cosmos. So, in this time, the architect is seen as a demigod who creates, following the model set out by the gods, using the tools given by the gods. Here we see the three main Greek orders: Doric order, Ionic order, Corinthian order, in varying degrees between simplicity to adornment and ornamentation. There are many other orders in architecture, and this would be disputed, added on, changed, merged, and elaborated. But if you are thinking about the classical Greek period, these are the three main ones. Next up, we have an exercise to try. You can try to sketch the elevation of a Greek temple and then label the parts. And now for the most famous Greek city, Athens, the most famous Greek hill, Acropolis, and the most famous Greek building, the Parthenon. This is an artist's impression based on historical text, and yes, the statue of Athena was that huge, right? Because they want to make sure that from anywhere in the city, people knows which goddess is in charge of Athens. This is the site plan of the Acropolis, where you can see several sites of worship, temples, altars, Parthenons on the top of the hill. There is a very clear separation between the secular, which mostly happens around the base of the hill, and as you go up the hill, that's where the sacred activities are located. And because you are now going from the base of the hill, around the hill to the top of the hill, the approach is elongated. So with this elongation, it opens up this possibility for rituals, for processions, storytelling to be designed into the route. Because you are now looking at the city at different levels as well. So this is how architecture is used in worship. On the left, you see an artist's impression of the Acropolis, and on the right, you see a plan view of the Parthenon. From the artist's impression, you have a sense of how the topography of the hill is being used to design a route for rituals, for processions, for the entire city. So these sites of worship are located along the hill, and there is a storytelling between how you go from the base of the hill all the way to the top. And the plan for the Parthenon itself is designed for a lot of people to congregate at one time. At the same time, there is a very strong sense of hierarchy. So architecture restated continually the rituals and the events, reinforcing the connection between humans and the gods, between the site, the landscape, and the heavens, between the horizontal realm of humankind and the vertical connection of the gods. And architecture functions as a chora, a place of continually becoming. This is one of the functions of architecture. Greek temples are often categorized in terms of their ground plan and the way in which the columns are arranged. A pro-style temple is one that has columns only at the front, while an amphi-pro-style temple has columns at the front and the rear. Temples with a peripteral arrangement, meaning the wings have a single line of columns arranged all around the exterior of the temple building. The dipteral temples simply have a double row of columns surrounding the buildings. And one of the more unusual plans is a tholos, a temple with a circular ground plan. And famous examples are attested at the sanctuary of Apollo in Delphi. So learn how to count the number and location of columns, sides, all round, front only, front and back. Then you can identify the typical floor plan and the type of floor plan of the Greek temple. Here you see various Greek building types. The naos is used to worship the gods, but is also used at the city treasury and public meeting spaces. The stoa is a long porch-like structure, often 2 or 3 stories high, with a back wall and colonnade. They are used as gathering spaces for the public, markets, for education, public offices, or simply places where people could stroll, meet other people, engage in dialogue, or even debates. The amphitheatres are often built into a hillside where the public, sometimes thousands of people, could participate through catharsis. The assembly hall was similar to the theatre but much smaller, and they are used for important town meetings. The gymnasia includes wrestling grounds, which are open from the outside, running tracks, lecture halls, and other smaller rooms where the athletes and warriors could train. And Greek houses, they were relatively simple in design, and usually they are centered around a courtyard, which would have been the scene for various ritualistic activities. The courtyard also provided natural light for the often small houses, and there is a segregation between the ground floor and the second story. The ground floor rooms would have included the kitchen, storage rooms, and perhaps an animal pen and a latrine. And the chief room was the site of a male-dominated drinking party or symposium, whereas the quarters for the women and the children could be located on the second level if present, and were, in any case, segregated from the men's area due to the difference in hierarchy and the nature of the activities that they participate in. A quick question to conclude the first part of the sharing. Consider the legacy of ancient Greeks. What contributions did they make to our contemporary society, culture, art, and architecture? Think about it.